So the question is really interesting here, because you said in majority of cases, yes, it is impossible to have this kind of concrete measurement of personality. Maybe then we need to skip this kind of quality criteria, so nice or relevant personality at all in that thing. So Sergej, maybe you will have some ideas on that. Can we skip these personal competences if we can't measure them, so according to the scientific standards? What do you think?
So good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer the question about how to measure personality. I could, basing my insights on my doctoral research, but I am here as a Transparency International Lithuania representative, the capacity of a person who deals with anti-corruption and transparency. And, you know, perhaps it might make more sense for me to wait a little bit once we start discussing the dichotomy between trust and the impact reputation has on trust, in this particular case, public trust, in regards to courts and transparency and accountability. So I'm provoking you a little bit, but I feel very comfortable being a panel attendee. So perhaps you will forgive me for this transgression.
So
I may.
So thank you, Georg. Maybe you would like to comment something?
Yes, because I had to smile when the professor was explaining that the psychologist science has limits on this. What was the reason we started to have a psychological test as part of the selection procedure in Austria about almost 30 years ago. Before we did not have, and just a committee of experienced judges screened with exams and a personal interview the candidates and made some kind of ranking then from what you would consider a face impression on paper and on person. And thinking that we selected the best possible candidates since a long time, then the total unimaginable thing happened. One of the judge's colleagues committed a murder. So they say the super GAU of selection procedure happened. So you select someone who was a candidate, very promising at the age of likely 27, 28, and then 10, 15 years later, he ended up in prison by having committed a murder. This was the point where everybody was shaking and said, okay, we have to bring in the expertise of science, of psychology. And yes, the conclusion was then you can rebalance it a little bit, but just by, of course, let's say, sort out those who may become once some kind of psychopath. Yeah? You and your colleagues, for God's sake, have this kind of special ability to know a little bit more about people to some extent and say, okay, the prognosis might be not that prosperous. So if you have 10 excellent candidates and there is an 11th with a question mark, don't select that one, but please choose someone from the 10th which seem to be normal. But this tackles a very important topic on the full selection procedure. We're always talking about this snapshot of selecting a candidate when it comes to select and apply the criteria. And we always forget about that. Usually this is done at the beginning of the career, so in most of the European states after university, meaning the colleagues are 26, 7 likely. But what is then happening, 30 years later, 35 years later, in the full career, for God's sake, we are humans, and I said this in my intervention, from the middle of the society, including failures. So all the range of social development is happening. We have a very productive phase, totally dedicated to our job. We may have private difficulties by getting divorced. We have small kids at home, stealing our night's sleep. Everything, for God's sake, we have this. And it is more about also think how the system is able to react what to do with a judge who is dropping off the board of being productive? What about a judge who is taking the wrong band and becoming, I don't know, corrupt or even a psychopath? So selection as this first snapshot is very important. But I would say for serving the purpose of providing a productive and effective judiciary, what is coming after is minimum as important, and a functioning mechanism who is able to react proactively and supporting the colleagues to stay on track is something which is also to be highlighted. And I never heard that this would be a new business for you and your colleagues. I never heard that judges have interviews later on in the career, even if this is meant as some kind of maybe support measure to give a reflection from a scientific point of view. This would be likely interesting. Coming across the idea now, after 25 years of being in the business. But maybe after 5 or 10 years, I would have loved to have maybe a private interview with a scientist about this, giving me reflection about how my personality is developing.
I think it's crucially important to understand that in our times, a person of 26, 27 years is just finished its development from adolescence to adulthood. Because before 2-3 generations back, it was between 16 and 18 years of age when adolescence finished and adulthood starts. Now it's different, and it's proved scientifically. So that means that the person becomes a judge just when he became an adult. And for him, this young adulthood is a very important period of development. And this is only in the conditions of the huge responsibility, making very important decisions about the fate of others. So I think that it has to be followed. And I thank you very much that you propose that it should be done, and I would say not with a scientist, but with a practitioner who works with people with problems, and he or she can help for this young professional to identify what kind of problems probably he or she has. Because one thing which I know from my practice, that plenty of judges are overworked and they are starting to burn out. And one of the terrible things of burnout syndrome, which is now included in medical classifications, and we have it as a mental disorder due to work conditions. And this burnout syndrome makes person who devoted himself or herself for that kind of job out of confession, out of enthusiasm, he becomes a skeptical and actually very even passive and critical member of this profession. And actually the problems he was about to solve before with some input of his energy and time now dissolves, and he loses the main thing which is necessary in every job, motivation. He loses motivation to be a good job, and very often he starts to see the people he deals with as guilty for their problems themselves. So therefore, his hands are clear and I am simply executing the law. And this is a very bad point for the career of that person, and he or she needs help. So I think one problem which was in Lithuania before, that anybody who got the psychiatric diagnosis formally, he or she could not work as a judge. Now it has changed. Just recently, half a year ago, The same applied, by the way, to medical doctors and nurses, too. They lost their job if they applied for some mental health. So that's crazy. So it means that person should work with problems instead of treating and having help for that problems. So that's crazy for me. But now it's changing a little bit, getting better. And I hope that all young colleagues who feel themselves losing their enthusiasm, their drive to work, instead of trying to cover that, ask for help, ask for assistance. It's possible to change. It's not deadly. It's indeed a kind of condition which is quite often in my practice, because I'm practicing psychotherapist. So I can guarantee we can help you, but you must first of all help yourself. Diagnose that something wrong is happening with you.
That's very important aspects also, because we are concentrating also on this periodic evaluation, on continuous evaluation of judges, so not only at this selected time point when you became a judge. Afterwards, this period when you are working as a judge is, of course, very important. The question would be, it's very interesting what you said about this burnout, about kind of knowing oneself when you need help. Is it possible to see it from the outside? So how should the court managers react? So how to see these weak points that they are developing in a judge during his career and can influence his career? Or are we talking here more about the self-evaluation? For example, that we have the periodic self-evaluation and the results say maybe, yes, you would need to consult some specialist, something like that. So could you give us maybe, Professor, some guidelines? Maybe Georg, you know from the international experience something about that. So how we should know as outsiders about these things?
And let me answer quickly from the management perspective, because this is the only headline which comes into my mind. And speaking about that, I realized in our discussion that this is very, very limited. How to detect that a judge is getting off the track if he is not really getting extremely criminal, but this is not the case. I mean, we all may...
No, we are talking about different
we all may have a diagnosis, but still more than 90% of the colleagues perform normally. And from the management perspective, you just look at the, let's say, indicators and figures, and you see that along the Gaussian deviation, 90%, let's call it, are providing normally, and then you have 5% plus minus doing the extremes. The key point there is that you act proactive as a court president, likely, to have a supervisional perspective on your colleagues, and that you are not waiting until the colleague is drawn amongst files endlessly, but you have this kind of sensitiveness and experience that, for example, if colleagues have a small baby at home, then it might, of course, decrease the performance. And this might be that you support that kind of colleague with, I don't know, an additional assistance, yeah, for example. Or same if there is some kind of difficult period in life, because maybe the partner has some critical disease, or there is a split of relationship, or whatever we know is a critical thing. As long as you are handling this proactively, it is very helpful. If you can read it then in the figures a year after, it's likely too late. But there is no common answer on that. There is no management model. This is just some best practices of people you know that they are doing it a little bit more, let's say, responsible and more experienced. But this is not institutional.
I'm sorry, but I want to disagree with you a little bit, and I will tell why. Just a month ago, I was preparing another presentation, and I found that there is a whole field of knowledge and skills, which is called LMX procedure, Leader-Member Exchange. And this is essentially about supervision. And what is absolutely clear that, for example, in these pandemic and lockdown times, this LMX appeared to be one of the most important procedures to compensate the detrimental effects of the lockdowns on the workers, on the members of the team. And this LMX is quite of knowledge, quite of already described skills by the leader, what he or she should do. And one of the essential things is proactive exchange about life and work of the members of the team done regularly. So here you are absolutely right, except that there is a knowledge and skills in this area. And I think that all chairpersons of the courts, all leaders of any judiciary organ should be trained in LMX. It's simple. It's really simple, but it's possible to train, and it's indeed can give some relief for all. For the leader who sees that something wrong happens and he doesn't know what to do. And for a member who feels bad and doesn't know who will help him, whom to address in that issue. So I think this could be a part of the additional impetus to this project we are talking all of us today.
And how about a self-evaluation of the person itself? Can we...
Self-evaluation is, let's say, burnout syndrome consists of 3 groups of symptoms. One of these symptoms is emotional exhaustion. So that is felt personally quite well. That's all. I can't do anything else. Second one, which is called depersonalization, is this cynicism towards the people I am working with. And this is very often covered by rationalizations. They are guilty themselves for the effects they obtain, so therefore my hands are clear. And therefore this part is very difficult to self-diagnose. And third part is a part of self-worth and self-effectiveness, which is very diminished. Person feels that he probably doesn't know something, doesn't have some skills, he can't perform productively his profession. And this is 50-50, something he can feel and something is seen from aside. So for self-diagnosis, it's not impossible, but it's difficult.
Thank you, Professor. I would like to ask Judge Sikora, so your personality for sure was measured during one or another time during your career. So could you share with us some personal insights? How does that feel for the judge when his personality is being so under scrutiny? Yes, thank you.
If I'm allowed, first of all, I would appreciate Professor a lot, because just now I've got a brief consultation, online consultation. And also I would say that I'm absolutely agree with the professor, because we can't measure human consciousness, character, and so on. Of course, we can reduce risks, but we cannot exclude all the mistakes that can be made. And test results can help, in my opinion, but only when they are interpreted by professionals. And my experience shows that every person has its own, his or her pain points or stress spots. I don't know how to say. And in this issue, every person has such problem time when difficult life situation can impact work. And in in Ukraine, every professional and especially every judge can face professional deformation. That's why I agree that intermediate testing should be made and after appointment to the position of a judge. In Ukraine, we have such a joke with can be said like this, that medicine is the second most accurate science after philosophy. And that's why I really think we can't measure all the characteristics which are very important for judge profession. About my own opinion, frankly speaking, for me, it all was quite easy because I was sure that I have no chance at all to win the competition. I did what I could as best as I could, and that's all.
Thank you. So we know also from our comparative research results that there are some countries who are using extensively the psychometrical tests to measure the personality of candidates to judges, like the Netherlands, who really have a very complex system, but this is not done by the judiciary itself. They have kind of subcontracted the universities with specialists, and all these procedures, we have the list of tests with very difficult sounding names. They are testing various behavioral aspects with different tests. The main idea from them is that this should be done by professionals. So we cannot just get a group of people, even if they are so highly professionals in the legal field, and say, evaluate the personality of some persons. So we need the professionals there. And the other thing is, they say this has no obligatory character. It's only one of the possible data. When we have all these tests done about the psychology, so this is only one, so with equal importance to with all other data available about that person. And this is actually the question which was already addressed, a very interesting question here related to what we do as professionals when we are selecting and deciding about the promotion of judges. So how to distinguish the data from the gossip? What should consist the data for the psychological evaluation of judges? On what kind of data can we relay? For example, if we do not have this psychometrical tests, what else can we use? Maybe Georg.
I just want to speak as a judge. We are trained to decide about millions of euros disputes, or we even decide to send someone for years into jail. And then we are afraid of deciding about who is the next best colleague to fit into. So let's balance it a little bit. It is of course not a total scientific process. It is supported, should be supported by scientists as experts to help us to sort out the wrong options and to give us some hint who might be the best running such kind of test things. But let's balance it a little bit by our professional experience and by the feel we have with dealing with people. Judges are dealing with people all day long. Yeah, this is more or less a more social job than a legal profession to some extent. So then also let's not be afraid of being part of this decision to select judges. I think we are not bad in this. It is just, of course, we are looking for the best option always, and we would love to have this kind of scheme where, like in an Excel table, you push the button and the algorithm is sorting out the right candidate. No, this is not happening. Life is more colorful. And if you look on judges, the body of judges, you see that this is a colorful business. You will find those who are this kind of typical businessman judge, and on the other hand, you have a family judge, maybe looking like the cousin of Bob Marley, but he is the best expert you can find. There is thousands of different types of excellent colleagues. All of them fit this purpose, but they would never fit into an algorithm of one kind of whatever scientist is preparing in the best manner. So yes, support is very much appreciated, and along the scientific objectives, acting nothing wrong, but let's not kill the discretion of selection by experienced judges and maybe civil society.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting that really this is the debate which is going on in Western countries for a long time. And I read one also from Germany when they have quite a, on the last stage, quite informal procedure, like you see, the discretion of the experienced person, judges who say, actually, we see this whole portrait from the data in the profile, and we can decide because, yes, we have the capacity to feel the person. And the question was, do they need, so the question was raised officially, do they need to make these procedures more transparent? And the answer was no. Because we're thinking about effectiveness and said the results show that if we do this in this more formalistic way, actually nothing changed. So more effective is to leave the things as they are. So the consideration goes, yes, really to the both sides of things.
Transparency, I think, is an issue of times because you have to prove that that cannot trust. The society is entrusting judiciary to do what they are entitled to. On the other hand, this is then creating that kind of responsibility of justice to show that the means and the trust we handed over and the power we handed over are dealt in the best way. And this also includes the selection and evaluation procedures. So to some extent, transparency is there a must. And I think in modern times, even more. But I don't have a problem to argue in the public also like this, why we selected the candidate and giving even some kind of explanation in a two-liner. This is, I think it's just that systems like in Germany or in Central Europe mainly are not used to that because they are still influenced by this public administration created by Joseph II in Central Europe, the late 18th century, that the administration and the government knows the best, and this doesn't have to bother you. No, we have stepped into more modern times where transparency is not harming, and any kind of decision a judge is taking is put in public. My decisions are published on the internet even 20 years after. You can read them. So this is not shocking for the business. We are acting in public. We are acting in front of the public as a court. Why not acting to some extent in public by explaining this kind of decisions to show the public why they should trust us and what we are doing here.
And you know, I think that actually transparency makes everybody who makes a decision more conscious about the mechanisms, how he is doing the decision. Yeah. And therefore, when I understand myself how I did and why one or other decision, it becomes quite easy to tell others and explain why I did it, but also it makes it more comprehensible to all sides, to candidate, to my colleagues in commission, to public if I would like. And here I see one problem still in Lithuania, that after all this quite intensive job we are doing in the commission, still the final decision is done by the other person, by the president, who shares with us nothing, because Constitution doesn't ask him or her to do that. And Professor Norkus very clearly described what is the paradoxical situation in Lithuania. We don't know the motives of the decision maker. We are transparent, we are ready to talk. The end step is not ours.
So in this long list where there was the start, the change, and the future, we really are here in this, the change is needed part in the whole procedures part. I would like to ask the question from audience, online audience, or maybe from those present here. We have a microphone on. Maybe someone would like to comment or to ask a question for anyone presented here. Dear Reda, maybe there are questions from the online audience also. We are checking also what our attendees online.
We have one question from the Albanian Supreme Court. Our colleague Miriam is asking, which kind of test would you suggest? The question is for the professor regarding the personality. And of course, it is a very complicated question, as I understand. And also, there is a question, would it be before or after the candidate is nominated? And I think this is the question, if there are some preconditions or some risks that should not allow the person to become a judge, and some of those personality features, they are just you can evaluate if the person is better or less fitted to the position. So this is the question to the professor.
So I see two questions here. First one, the quality of the candidate. Who is the better, who is the worse? So here there are quite formal, good intellectual tests, and they can measure the intellectual abilities of the candidate and how he is ready to solve unexpected, complicated problems. It's not a problem. It can be measured. You can in Albania find plenty of good psychologists. I know them personally, so you should talk to them and they will help you. Another one is a question what our colleague from Austria told, that somebody can develop in a way that he will be able to perform a terrible act later on, when at the starting point of his career, he was quite a good candidate with nice personality. Something terrible happened in his life and changed him, and we cannot predict that. What we can predict, if we are talking about some dangerous features of the personality, is impulsivity. If the person can control his or her emotional responses when these emotions transfer to actions. Because we can measure, and all the judiciary system actually evaluates actions, not intentions. So when we are talking about actions, we can measure some impulsivity in the past of this person, and if he or she is really unable to control strong emotions in the socially acceptable manner, he is bad candidate for judge.
Thank you. So maybe there are some questions from our audience here or comments.
If I can be considered as an audience, so I would like to ask a question to Mr. Muravjovas. As we are talking about those things that are not so easily evaluated, those soft skills and personality and so on, but still we have to ensure that the process is objective and transparent in the eyes of society, which is expecting the judge to become a judge, a person who is possessing all the necessary features and skills. So what would be your insights or opinion about how to ensure this objectiveness and transparency, taking in mind that some of those stages or aspects of the procedure are not so well described or not so easily described? Thank you.
All right, so thank you so much for your question, Reda. I was listening to the discussion and I was filled with joy, because the biggest compliment the person who works on transparency and anti-corruption related matters could be is when others, and especially the representatives of the profession in question, use the vocabulary, operate it freely, and actually understand the rationale as to why greater transparency is needed. So thank you for that. As for the role of transparency and accountability, I think it's essential to agree as to what we mean by transparency. And while listening to Eugenijus and other panelists, I thought, it's probably important to agree that transparency is the truth well told, something which is understandable and is presented in a relatively digested manner, while if you're interested, you can also look additional things up and understand what the background or the basis for those insights is. And as a member of the same commission that Eugenijus was referring to, I can say that indeed courts have made strides in terms of understanding why transparency matters and why it should be data-driven transparency. Yet, I'm not sure whether it is sufficient nowadays to speak just about the ways to measure the personality of the judge and what the best fitted person for that position is based on psychological evaluations. I'm sure this is key, but we all know that tests are tests, and actions, circumstances that people are put into actually matter just as much, if not more, because that is the true test of the personality. And that is the randomness that we often encounter in our life that we cannot account for. And therefore, we need regular and thorough checks onto how judges understand their code of conduct, how they understand they should behave, how they manage to avoid conflicts of interest, how they declare potential interests and actually conduct their decision-making in the manner we expect them to. And that is what is actually lacking, I think, not only in Lithuania, but also all across the region. And it's not that there's anyone in particular to blame. I think this is the culture that we have inherited from before the 1990s, when corruption and transparency have taken a much greater stand in our public domain, because this is a novel phenomenon. I understand why for a lot of the representatives from the judiciary, it still is counterintuitive to account for their actions, tell people more about what they do, because it's not that they necessarily need to feel threatened. I think that it's just something which is not a part of their habit yet. But as Georg pointed out, I think this is key for us to actually productively move forward and really grasp what we mean by the concept of public trust. I don't think you can gain public trust in judiciary, and you cannot gain public trust in the decision-making of judges just through public relations or the hoopla surrounding the profession anymore. Those days are gone, and we have to agree on that. The sooner we realize that, I think the better. And I do think that nowadays the concept of public trust relies heavily on the accountability mechanisms in place put there by the judiciary and supervisory institutions, if within the judiciary itself, to inform us how judges or the candidates to a particular court were selected. What data was there available beforehand? If it's a judge who already has been performing their duties, what court that person comes from? Has that judge performed well? Is there any public statistics available for us to understand how many cases, for instance, been revised? What are the actual outputs of that particular judge's decision-making? If it's a new person who just came in on the job, we do need to understand the pedigree of that person. And yes, certain information will probably be private, as it should be, but the commission should be presented with that data and information in due time, have enough time to actually digest it, discuss it, and get an honest feedback from the representatives of other institutions and self-governing bodies within the community, so that we could make, or the other people can make, the best decision possible. If that's the case, no, that is not the case all the time. Why? Because I understand that a lot of times, and maybe things have changed over the past 5 or 6 years, people are pressured for time. They need to make their decision fast. They rely on other people who suggest certain things. They actually rely on the sincerity of the candidates. But quite frankly, I think that the representatives of the judiciary committee, of the judiciary community, are one of the smartest and well-versed people I have ever encountered. And they really, I think, understand what is tactfulness, what is diplomacy, what is the right and proper manner to appear and speak in front of you. Now, I don't mean that there's any ill intent. I'm just saying that such people are very difficult to evaluate because they all come across as pleasant individuals and people who really mean well, and they probably do. But the role of the commission that is in charge of the selection of them for further office and the role of the public later on is to understand, well, have you done the right choice? Have you made the right choice? Have you done the right decision? And if you don't have data for that, and that's my key point, and that's the sort of key takeaway message that I would like to leave you with, it becomes very difficult to decide on. So data, comparable data produced by courts, data used by the heads of courts, data that allows us to understand how well judges have been performing if they are judges that already have some working experience. And that data, of course, has to be presented in a meaningful way to the public on a regular basis and used by courts, the courts community itself, because otherwise it's not going anywhere. The only way forward is for that data to be a projection of the way the courts community, the judiciary community actually thinks of managing risks and making the best decision possible and really being the most transparent community it can be.
Thank you for your input. Yes, please, short remark.
Short.
Yes, because we are going to the lunch break, but you have a few minutes, Georg, to respond. Please.
Two short remarks on what you said on transparency. First of all, judicial community is still not that excellent in promoting what we're really doing. If you ask and talk to people on the street, they think total different stuff like we do in real. If you open a newspaper, you find a lot of criminal stories and blood and crime, and everybody thinks that this is our main business. If you look into the statistics, you see that we don't do criminal business at all, almost. Yeah, this is in most of the countries, criminal cases are somewhere between 5% of the incoming cases and maybe 10, and that's it. The backbone is civil procedures, securing the social, the social together, bonding, the economy, and all these kind of things from our normal life. But this is not attractive to display. No journalist is interested in sorting out a family problem or a car accident. This is not selling, of course. So first thing about that. So more transparency on what we're doing is improving it already, or the perspective we are understood. And second, applying transparency on selection procedure is safeguarding the independence of judiciary. Why? Because from political perspective, judiciary is not very important. On political priorities, there is other things we all agree to. I don't know, public security, the doctor in medical hospital, the second native speaking English teacher in the class of my son, something like that. And then there is somewhere judiciary. And then from political perspective also we may become very inconvenient. So politicians are never too much into us and therefore want to keep us small and in worst case even influence a little bit what we are doing. If we are not transparent, the influence is easier because some intransparent procedure exists fine, and political influence we find the way through to influence the system. If we act transparent, if we explain to the public how judges are elected, how they are performing, this kind of influence would have to be taken place in the light of the public, and this, of course, therefore not that easy. Therefore, more transparency would safeguard independence at the end.
Thank you. It sums up very well the discussion as transparency as the shield from unwanted influences onto the judges. Thank you all for being here. We are meeting again in 45 minutes after the lunch break.